Okay, we're live.
We are. Hi everybody. So as Rachel's just said, we are live. My name is Amber Bauer. I'm the founder of Donate for Refugees. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, where we're going to be learning about the refugee crisis and its impact in Cyprus and specifically in Paphos. I'm very happy to welcome our guest today, Rachel Paphos.
Hi.
Hi, Rachel. Hi. It's really nice to have you here. So Rachel is co-founder of an organization called Mazi, and I might have the pronunciation wrong, but Rachel's going to correct me later.
You were fine. It's actually Mazi together. Ma'an, together is obviously together in English. Mazi means together in Greek, and Ma'an is together in Arabic. So because three of us co-founded it, that's why it's got the three languages.
Which is really nice, but not up to my pronunciation standards. So I will leave that bit to you. But it's very nice to have you here, and we're going to learn a little bit today about the situation for refugees in Cyprus, a bit about what Mazi does and how it helps, what challenges we've been facing this year to do with the COVID crisis and other things, and then we'll also take any questions. Well, there's a couple more questions at the end, but we'll also take any questions from anybody who is listening, who wants to say hello to Rachel, congratulate her on her excellent work, or to ask any questions, which I'll put to her at the end on your behalf. So let's just start and go straight into it, Rachel. Would you be able to explain to us a little bit about the refugee situation in Cyprus, and especially in Paphos, where you're based?
Okay, Cyprus, as of 2019, had the highest proportion or had the highest number per capita population of asylum applications in Europe. We have now about 32,000 refugees and asylum seekers, which make up about 4% of the population of about 800,000. To give a comparison, Germany, with 2.4 million refugees, with 2 million refugees, that's about 2.4% of the population. And I think that even Greece, with its large number of refugees, only has about 1.6%, whereas we're close to 4%. This is being used by the right wing here as a scare tactic to say, they're changing the demographics, particularly because Cyprus has always been on the margins of Christianity and Islam. So it's the point at where Christianity and Islam intersect, and because of the war in 1974, there's a uncertainty about Islam. I don't want to say that there's problems, because between Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriots, there were not problems that were not manufactured, but Cypriots are wary about getting a higher percentage of Muslims as part of the population, and this is being exploited by the right wing as a kind of, we've got too many refugees, they're going to change the makeup of our island population, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have a lot. The infrastructure for dealing with claims has not caught up. So waits for interviews take a year, 2 years. COVID makes that worse, because for every time you have to go to an office, you need an appointment. It's difficult to get appointments. COVID is complicated.
And what sort of nationalities do you see in Cyprus as refugees?
It depends where in Cyprus. For instance, in Paphos, we have a lot of Syrians, because there were Syrians who were working here during the housing boom 10 or 12 years ago. So a lot of workmen came here. And then once the war came to Syria, they found ways to bring their families. So we have a lot of Syrian families here. In
And this
Nicosia,
is something I had no idea. I had no idea that there were already Syrians there for the building trade. And so
they came over because they're skilled workers in stone, and so a lot of people, liked having them as stone workers, but also, as general builders. They would do the jobs, the lower paying jobs that maybe Cypriots wouldn't do. And they came from nearby. They picked up, the builders anyway, the workmen picked up the language quickly. So you find Syrian workers here who speak fluent dialect. Because, okay, they can't maybe have a philosophical conversation on things outside the building trade, but they communicate very well. In Nicosia, I think they have a lot more Africans. Also, the Syrians that we have here tend to be more families, in Paphos anyway, although there are single men, whereas African asylum seekers tend to be younger. They tend not to be in families. There's a lot of single women who have traveled. Many of them have left children behind. So it depends where you are. I don't think we have too many Afghans. In Paphos, to my knowledge, we don't have any Afghans. There may be some in Nicosia.
okay.
We have there's a lot of Indian and Pakistani asylum seekers who've come. We have quite a few Palestinians. We've had people come on boats recently from Lebanon. So it's quite a mix.
And what about the living conditions for them, Rachel? I don't think that there's camps, but I could be wrong. Where?
There's a camp in Kofinu, which is halfway between Larnaca and Nicosia. So it's about an hour and a half's drive from where I live in Paphos. And that's where people get sent first. Well, first of all, now, especially with COVID, they get sent to a reception center, which until recently was canvas. Now I think they've got containers there. Then once they've been through quarantine, they get moved out either to Kofinu camp, which I think is quite full, or they end up looking for their own housing. So and then there's the detention camp, which is for people who are being deported or who have gotten into trouble for some other reason.
Okay. So for those that don't go to the camp and don't go to detention, they get they rent an apartment. And,
yeah.
And that's when they're asylum seekers. Once they're refugees, once they've got their status in Cyprus, are they then in like apartments at that point?
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of on their own as far as finding their own apartment goes.
Okay.
There are hostels that are used for asylum seekers here, but I think a lot of refugee families just sort of end up leaving the camp because the conditions in the camp, okay, they're nothing like Greece, but they're not particularly comfortable. And I think I haven't spoken to anybody who's come out of a camp recently, but I think that the food is not good, the conditions are not particularly good, and so they voluntarily leave and strike out on their own to try and find their own housing.
Okay, and find their own way. So if we then move on to Mazi and the organisation that you set up or co-founded, what sort of help is it that you give, and what were your ambitions when you set up the organisation?
Before the first lockdown, which was March to May, I think, we were operating out of a donated premises that had been an acting school on the top of somebody's house. And it was very nice. It belonged to a friend of my colleague, and he very generously allowed us to use it for 2 years. We offered there adult language classes, so English and Greek. We had a physical yoga class. We have a wonderful volunteer yoga teacher. We have an Arabic-speaking psychologist who has been a fantastic support to us for a couple of years. And she would come, I think, once a week. doing group therapy sessions with the Arabic-speaking ladies, because we had some Iranian asylum seekers at the time, so obviously they wouldn't come because it would be in Arabic. We had possibly, well, I don't know, how can you qualify it as important or more important, but we had support for children. So you get kids who come here and go into, not speaking any Greek, go into Greek schools, and without language support, they fall behind. So my colleague Mariana, who I hope is listening, would, with several other volunteers, would give language support to the kids. And, you know, it was great to see that. My colleague Aitab, who's Palestinian, was giving Arabic lessons to the kids, because the kids speak Arabic but don't read and write it because they're going to school in Greek. So she was giving Arabic language classes to the kids. So we had Greek, Arabic, and English going. We had yoga. We had psychological support. What else did we have?
It looks like you did some activities as well, because there's a lot of cooking, there's a lot of drawing on your.
There was handicraft. There was handicraft classes. There were some teachers came from the municipality. This was one of the ways the municipality supported, is that we would have. There was a basket making class. There was a doll making class, and they would all be through Greek. So. Okay. Even if the people participating were not fluent in the language, they were being exposed to it. Then we stopped language teaching for adults, and we started focusing on getting adults exposed to the language in other ways. So we would enroll them in the adult education program that's offered by the state. And maybe one of their teenage kids would go along as a translator for the Arabic speakers. The teachers of the adult education class teachers were fine with that. And the women would then be, say, doing hairdressing or tailoring through Greek with their own little translator there, but they would be doing sort of hands-on things. And it's often a lot easier, particularly for adults, to learn things without having to write them down, or without things that are relevant. So not grammar exercises, but actually hands-on learning.
And conversations, yeah.
Yeah, so we would be doing, we offered that service as well.
And brilliant. And so during 2020 has been quite a year for many parts of the refugee crisis, and for everybody there's been COVID, which you've already mentioned a few times, because how can you not? How has COVID impacted the services, or anything else that's happened during this year, specifically in 2020?
Well, for us, it closed our premises. Yoga teaching immediately went online. Our fantastic volunteer yoga teacher set up Zoom yoga classes. And yoga, I think, continued pretty much without a break. And every week we have a yoga class. Psychological support continued online. Language didn't. We had just started resuming Greek classes for the ladies, because we have a new teacher who came on board who has been living here, and she finished high school here. She's Syrian. So she was teaching Greek through Arabic, which I couldn't do. I was teaching Greek through English with a translator, which is difficult, whereas she could speak directly. So that shut that down. And then right after the lockdown finished, and we were preparing to start a new summer program of arts classes and seminars, and because we were working with the Cyprus Refugee Council on employability seminars and various things, young entrepreneur programs, whatever. We lost our premises, unfortunately. Something else that we were doing, and we continue to do online through Arabic, is ITAP gives very popular seminars to do for the ladies, because primarily we deal with ladies. Our charter is to help women and children. on things like health, raising children as a minority in a different culture, bullying, language, all kinds of topics she covers, and she does that online through Arabic again. So this has made our ladies feel much more of a group rather than a disparate kind of collection of people who came for language lessons, if that makes sense.
So your services, sorry, Victor, your services have moved online, which is fantastic. What impact has the coronavirus had on the refugee community as a whole this year?
I can't speak for Nicosia because I don't really know anybody who's working there. In Paphos, it's made everything much harder. Housing, finding housing is much harder. Registering with the labor office is much harder because for everything you need an appointment. There used to be a pretty good advisory NGO that had an open door policy that you could just kind of go in, and they had a psychologist there, they had a couple of social workers, and there was always a queue for people to see them. Now with COVID, I think actually they've closed down now, but you had to have an appointment, and it was very hard to get an appointment. So everything went over to appointments, and you can wait for months to get to the labor office now.
So it's just everything's just much slower, much more difficult.
Mm-hmm. I was at social welfare office helping somebody the other day, and the ladies, it's in the building of an old primary school, so the people who were working in the office were inside a window, and we were on a walkway outside the window, and people were kind of like, oh, see me, to me next, and they were like, no, get in a queue and everything. So they were doing that without appointments. But I think then other people would show up and say, no, we want to see the social worker, we have an appointment for this time, and whatever. Otherwise, it's a bit of a scrum outside the window with people waving pieces of paper.
You mentioned earlier that your constitution is mostly to help women and children, but I think that you also have some help for men. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do language teaching for men, but it's separate. But recently there has been problems with young Syrian men. There was a murder here, a Syrian to Syrian, in Paphos, and the lack of integration was very highlighted. So I was approached by a member of the Syrian community who's a businessman here, and he had been trying to get people's attention onto this, and he ended up talking to me because I had taught his sisters. But the idea he had was to put together a series of seminars, because he said after 8 or 12 years of war, young men don't know anything except war. So for them, it's quite normal to walk down the street with a knife, whereas in Cyprus, of course, it's completely against the law. They don't know how to deal with police if you get stopped at a routine traffic stop. They don't know whom to call if they come to their house and somebody who's not supposed to be there is there. So he proposed to put together a series of seminars that was to be delivered by an Arabic-speaking man, and we did have somebody who was available for that. So he and I put our heads together metaphorically, and had a couple of meetings and came up with a whole series of I think it was 6 or 8 lectures. And we approached the UNHCR, we approached Cyprus Refugee Council, and they were very positive because this actually came from a member of the community. And then I got a letter back saying, well, maybe it will be this was 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago. Maybe we should look at doing it in the spring. And I was kind of like, we need to do this now.
We do now.
So through other channels, I got in touch with the police, and we had a very helpful meeting with the police, and they were very keen, and it went up to division level, and I haven't heard since. So
Oh,
that's, we've got somebody from the community who's put this together. We've got somebody to deliver it. We need a premises. Now with the lockdown, we're not going to get it. But everybody was, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. And I've tried calling the police numerous times since then. And
could you deliver it online?
nothing. It would be hard. Because one of the things that we were hoping was that in each lecture we would have like policemen there or people from the Labour Office so that they could deal with questions. And to do that online would just be, I think, logistically very difficult. But anyway, that's one of the services that we were sort of hoping to help out with men. That's not language teaching or sort of direct hands-on assistance, but is also the community helping itself, and we were facilitating that.
It sounds like a fantastic initiative. I think there should be more about the social engagement and the differences in culture, and there should be a lot more lessons about these kind of things and what to expect when people get here, and not just because they've come from war zones and they might be used to carrying knives, but just simple things like rules in other countries around smoking in the street or throwing a cigarette butt away, or simple things where the
and also there was a lot to do. We wanted to tackle gender, both within the Arabic community, so that the men would realize that as refugees here, their wives and their daughters were allowed access to education, were allowed access to work. This is not maybe how it would be in Syria, but if you've come here and sought asylum here, you're in a different culture, and this is how the different culture works. And also relations perhaps with non-Syrian women. So how to come from a culture where women are much more covered to seeing perhaps tourists on the beach in shorts and bikinis and things like that.
And less. Yeah, quite. Something we talked about in Greece a lot. I think really needs to be addressed and tackled. You've obviously worked with a lot of people, and especially women and children, over the last couple of years. I'm sure that there's many who've touched your heart, who you've heard a story about them and it sort of stopped you in your tracks or made you wonder at how they achieved something that they've had to do in their lives. Is there anything that you could share with us today about somebody that's kind of inspired you or left you jaw dropped by something that they've been through?
We tend not to discuss personal stories unless somebody brings it up. But one of my former students, friends, whatever you want to call her, who has 7 children, left Aleppo when things became very difficult, when her youngest child was 4 months, and packing up her 7 children, walked to Turkey. And her husband was one of the people who was here. So I think she got here fairly easily on family reunification, and I'm not sure whether she came by boat or not. But she briefly told me how difficult her trip was with 7 kids, including a baby, and small children aged between less than 1 and 13, over the mountains into Turkey. That's the kind of thing that, well, I couldn't imagine me as a 27-year-old or however old she was just doing that physically. And she said, people kind of fell down here and fell down there. I think they were shot at on the Turkish border. But she came with a group. But just things like that are considered every day, really.
Yeah.
And, for us, they're just like,
very much so. Stuff like that gives me goosebumps, and I just can't imagine what's happened in their lives to make them have to do that, and then the strength that they must have to find from within to physically be able to pack and bring 7 children along with them on this journey. You mentioned there as well something about you're not sure how she got to Cyprus. How are refugees arriving in Cyprus? I mean, presumably on family reunification, there's a chance that they'll be flying in.
Yes, family reunification flies.
How do other people come? How do other asylum seekers come?
Well, some come on boats. We had, I can't remember when the first boats came, I think 2016. And they were usually mistakes. They were boats that meant to go to Italy or meant to go to Greece and kind of ended up here. There was one boat that ended up on the British sovereign bases, and that was an administrative problem because, of course, the sovereign bases are supposed to be British soil, aren't they? So they were thinking, oh, great, we're going to get sent to England. Well, no. After a few months of detention, they got handed over to the Cypriot authorities. Many of them come with smuggling routes through Turkey. So I think most of the Africans that we have here from various different parts of Africa have flown to Turkey and then are flown to the north, the occupied part of northern Cyprus, which is under Turkish, well, it's
complicated.
And then they walk across the border. They're kind of directed to the border and told, okay, go that way. And when you get to a police station, claim asylum. Or they manage to get to Turkey somehow and then come on boats. Because there are boats that go from the Turkish coast to the north coast of Cyprus.
Which I feel like looking at a map about this point, but what duration? How long is that taking?
The boat?
Yeah. How long does that take them to make the crossing? Do you know?
No, I've never spoken to anybody about the details of that. I know a couple of people who've come by boat, and they're usually small boats, and he's a big, strong man, and he said, I was very scared. He said it was night, it took a long time, and I was very scared. So I don't know.
Okay, no problem. So if we start to look forward then, what happens next? Nobody knows that with COVID. There's a big unknown here, but what's the plan next for Mazi, and how can people like us and Donate for Refugees and people at home offer some help?
Our priority is getting a premises, because we had to move out of the place that we were, which means that half of the stuff, the books and toys and everything, is in my daughter's bedroom downstairs, and half of the rest of it, the furniture, is in my colleague's basement. And we need desperately a place that can be a hub, a focal point. We're talking about doing cooking seminars. I mean, one of the things that I would love to rent, because unfortunately, a lot of restaurants have folded lately. I would love to be able to rent a restaurant, but we're looking at maybe getting a premises that included a cafe. It's a municipal property to do cooking workshops and things in. Oh, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say now.
What about the education? Will you be starting up with the lessons, the language lessons again?
Yes, certainly. The other thing that we were thinking of trying to start is like going around to the supermarkets and to the Laiki markets, the street markets where they sell fruit and vegetables, and at the end of the day asking the vendors for anything that they have which is usable, but maybe not perfect condition or something like that. And either setting up, they do this in Nicosia it's a joint project with an NGO called Zero Waste Cyprus, I think. I apologize if I've got that name wrong. But and they work with Caritas to go to the Saturday market, and I think they get a couple of 100 kilos of stuff. They divide it up and they pass it out to families that are registered to come and collect food from them. We want to do the same thing here, but we don't have a place to do it. To talk to supermarkets and bakeries, so at the end of the day we can, sort of 1 or maybe 2 days a week, pick up surplus food that is still usable but would otherwise get dumped. One of the things that we did during the first lockdown, which coincided in part with Ramadan, was because we had a lot of the breadwinners were out of work. We did do food packages. In fact, Donate for Refugees supplied the money for the food packages. So you had a lot of very grateful families for that. And it's not that we particularly want to get into distribution, but there are a lot of people that are hungry.
Yeah.
And if we can supplement their diet, I mean, one of the things I would love to do is get a place that had a garden and start a community garden. So that, even if it's just growing a few bunches of spinach or chard or tomatoes or whatever, that first of all, people realize how you do that. And so they can replicate it at home on their verandas. But it's great for kids. It's great for just saving a couple of euros a week, maybe. So, but we need a place. Yeah. So any nice donor who wants to, we're looking at rents that are upwards of about 600 a month.
Okay.
That would include everything. We could get somewhere that was 600 a month, I think, 700 a month, 800 a month.
Yes, we recognize that. Okay, well, I mean, certainly, obviously, you can come to Donate for Refugees for grants as well, and our supporters keep very loyal with us, and absolutely wonderful people that support us. So we're here, but we don't pay the regular monthly, so I know that you need something more substantial, more regular. Rachel, believe it or not, that's been over half an hour.
Oh my
time
God.
flies when we're doing these.
Yeah,
it really does. Is there anything else that you want to share with people that are listening today?
Not really. I mean, racism is alive and well, and one of the most important things that we can do is recognize that we're all humans, whatever our skin color or faith. And what separates me from a refugee from Cameroon is luck, really. Recognizing that there are people who came from ordinary middle-class families and suddenly overnight lost everything that they identified with. And that could just as easily happen to me, to you, or to anybody who's watching this. So it doesn't matter what your skin color is, or what your faith is, or what your gender is, or whatever. We're all the same.
I completely agree. And we need to help. We have to help them. If it was us, if it was our children, and we were somewhere else.
Yeah, that's basic. I have 4 sons. They're the ages, or 3 sons, sorry, 4. I have 3 sons who are the ages of the men who are reviled here now as being dangerous or being parasites or whatever. Just, if my sons ended up being refugees somewhere, I wouldn't want them to be thought of as being dangerous or parasites. They're not.
Of course.
These are young men just like, Anyway.
No,
that's it really. I could talk for a lot longer about that.
No doubt. Well, all that remains for me to say is thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Rachel. I've certainly learned a lot because I knew very little. Despite us supporting you for a little while, I'd never actually been to Cyprus, and I knew very little about the prices over there and how refugees, what their lives are like in Cyprus. So it's been very enlightening for me, and I hope so for anybody that watches this now or later as well. We are doing a series of these interviews, and we'll be back online in 2 weeks' time, Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Greece and Cyprus. And we'll be speaking to Sally Hyman of Cribs International, who looks after women and children in the Athens area. She'll be interviewed by Sophie Hetherington Hayward, who's got a nice tongue twister name. But we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. So thank you very much today, Rachel. We don't have any questions, but we do have lots of lovely comments from people which you can catch up on shortly.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me. Okay.